Okay, let's go ahead and just get started on lecture 2 or degree 2. Um, Gonna go ahead and do a quick review, and I wanted to give a quote that I forgot to give yesterday, and also explain a little better why I'm doing this and how I'm doing this. So what I said yesterday was I got into this from I started looking into these things after one of my friends on Facebook sent me a documentary called Endgame. I watched that documentary, and it kind of opened my eyes up a little bit to things that are going on that um, most people weren't aware of back on that time. Um, and then I also watched another video that he sent from Jordan Maxwell that was where he was talking about how our social security number and our birth certificate are traded on the stock market, um, and how pretty much the elites just see us as cattle and they make money up off of us, off of our labor. So that kind of got me interested in those things more than I had already been, because I already had wondered about, um, does the president really run things in the United States, or is he a puppet like other people said? So I started getting into those things, started researching those things, watching a lot of YouTube videos, and getting a lot of knowledge, but also getting a lot of things that weren't correct and really not believable. So I realized I had to do my own research if I really wanted to know the truth. So that's what I started to do, and that's why I'm here now. Um, so hopefully I can help you and save you time from having to read all the books and everything, and you can get what I see as the truth. So just to do a re-summary of yesterday, our main thing that we were talking about was duality, um, how it's needed to understand what's going on today and what's been going on during human history, especially like the last 5,000 years. But it's universal, it's everywhere. Um, we talked about the importance of the Egyptian mythologies and stories, um, how they seem to have already known a lot of things about the universe already, and we get a lot of our ideas and stuff from them, and how Western culture actually began in Egypt. It didn't begin in Greece or in Rome. It began in Egypt and then moved into Greece and then moved into Rome. Um, so we went over that. We talked about how math is connected to duality, mathematics. Um, that religion and science are the same things. Don't try to separate those. We talked about what theoretical physicists do. So they think about things, about the universe, then they try to test it and see if they can prove it with math. And if they prove it with math, then they say that it's true, that it must be true. It's hard for them to do those experiments, but that's why critical thinking and the human mind and the human intelligence is so important. We talked about the scale factor of duality, so all the way from the tiniest cell to the nano, whatever goes farther back, micro, nano, technology, all that stuff, atoms, molecules, protons, neutrons, all the way up to a universe and then a multi-universe. How they should work the same way. They all should work the same way as each other, and they should all have the same components and parts that make it work, um, and function as its own unit. Uh, okay, so I think that's about it. So I wanted to talk about this. I didn't read this quote, so I'm going to read this quote about duality. It's from Gordon McCabe from Cornell University, in his paper or his book, The Duality of the Universe. And he says, it's proposed the physical universe is an instance of a mathematical structure which possesses a dual structure, and this dual structure is the collection of all possible knowledge of the physical universe. In turn, the physical universe is then the dual space of the mathematical structure. So that's what we were actually talking about yesterday. So today we're going to get more into human ancestry and human origins. And we're going to be beginning in East Africa because right now all the current evidence points to East Africa being the origin of life. And I want to focus particularly, this is the equator. This blue line that I just popped up is the equator. And I want to focus particularly on just south of the equator, right in this area, and just east of Lake Victoria, right here in this area. Okay, in Kenya. This is the country of Kenya. 100% in Kenya. So, in this area, there is a lot of fossil sites that they found. And we go back in time to this area, to the Great Rift Valley. So the specific area we're talking about, not this one, this one right here, this green shaded area. This is the area where our origins are, and this is where a lot of the earliest fossil sites have been found. The fossil sites that they found in Europe and Asia are like 5 to 10 million years younger than here. So the oldest ones are found here in Africa. Nowhere else in the whole world are older fossils found. So this area goes from, in like a 45-degree angle. I like to say it's a 45-degree angle if you're coming from the edge of the northeast edge of the lake and you go up through this way, but actually that's not true because we want to get to the rift. So if you're coming east till you get to the rift, the eastern rift, which is right about here, and then you follow that up through Lake Turkana and then up through Lake Turkana up through Ethiopia with all the lakes in the rift of Ethiopia. That's the specific area, and the specific might possibly be the specific migration pattern out of this area. It also moves south through these lakes. See these lakes right here? So the rift is moving south, and right here in this area left of the rift is the Serengeti Plain, where thousands and thousands of different types of mammals live, right? So this is the birthplace of humanity right here. Lake Victoria wasn't here at that time. This is only a depression, and this area was already just being formed by, well, it started being formed like about 50 million years ago, and the earliest human type of primate is proconsul, and he's not here until like 30 million years ago. So Lake Victoria wasn't here. This was just a depression, and it was probably a moist area when it rained, and it probably made a little small lake or something in this area. And so don't think of Lake Victoria as here yet. But for some reason, humans still came out of this area. So we're going back 28 million years ago when the first ape-like human ancestors existed here. So we're going to be talking about from about 28 million years ago to about 5 million years ago. Okay, so talking about Lake Victoria again, um, Lake Victoria didn't come into existence until about 400,000 years ago as a result of regional tilting, which scientists were able to calculate from seismic profiles. That's a quote out of one of my sources. Of course, I call this the third eye of Earth, with the sun being an eye and the moon being an eye. We talked about that last night. The gods Horus and Osiris are the representatives of the sun god Ra on Earth, and therefore are his eyes on Earth. So they're always watching us. So they created a human god on Earth, and they pretty much said he's always watching us, just like the sun and the moon are always watching us. So basically, God is always watching. So I don't think that the third eye is the pineal gland, like some people saying, like they do in India, where they put their dot on their forehead. I don't know why they do that. I didn't look into it. Maybe that's a continuation of the Egyptian third eye. I don't know. Um, I haven't even really heard Egyptians talking about a third eye yet so far in my research. But we're not going to be really be into Egypt until a little bit later. But I'll always compare what I already do know to the earlier civilizations. So any type of first civilization would have existed here first before anywhere else. And you can make up your own rules for what you think civilization is, but um, 200,000 years ago, people were already as smart as us, you know, close to as smart as us. So the pineal gland is probably actually quite insignificant compared to other things found within the brain and the heart. The heart will actually take precedence in this research based on the fact that the ancient Egyptians paid special attention to the heart. The British named the Lake Victoria by the supposed discoverer of the lake, of which was named who was named John Hanning Speke, who says that Victoria in Nyanza, so Lake Victoria used to be called Lake in Nyanza, which, and he says, which I discovered on July 30th, 1858, which eventually proved to be would eventually prove to be the source of the Nile. So he thought he discovered the source of the Nile. This British guy, right? uh, when people were already living there for millions of years, and he discovered the source of the Nile. I guess nobody else at that time, outside of, let's just say, outside of Africa, knew the source of it. The Egyptians probably wouldn't tell them. Um, well, I think I contradicted myself on there. Uh, well, yeah, people were living there for millions of years, but the lake wasn't there for millions of years. But it was there for at least 400,000 years. So it also might be, in fact, the beginning of the White Nile. However, we cannot forget about the Blue Nile, which provides far more water to the Egyptian Nile Valley. The Victorian portion of the White Nile actually drains into Lake Albert, which is named after a British prince who was Queen Victoria's husband. Therefore, it is not continuous or uninterrupted in its journey to Egypt. So I think we can see that in this picture here. Uh, where's it at? No, right here. If you can see this, you can see Here's where the White Nile comes, right here. And it drains into Lake Albert, and then it continues up north, moving north, and goes all the way until through South Sudan, all the way up, continues, and you can see the Blue Nile over here coming around these choke mountains in Ethiopia. This is it moving over right here, and then they meet up here farther north. uh, Speak, that's one of the guys that I'm quoting, that I quoted earlier, apparently helped Sir Samuel Baker discover this lake. Nevertheless, it is very important to grasp that the lakes were named after a British queen and prince, not because of the colonization of the area by the British, but because they knew that the area was the roots of humanity and religion. They sent many expeditions into this area in order to make discoveries of human roots. It is very well possible that the area where Lake Nyanza now sits was also inhabited by people when it was still dry. It, it could have filled rapidly, potentially flooding this huge area of land where it now sits, and could quite possibly be, I put first here, but I'm wrong, it could quite possibly be the second deluge. So we talked about last night, the first flood would actually be the earth once it was created and there was no continents filling with water. So the whole earth is covered with water before we see any continents. And that's what they would call uh, the primordial abyss, or Nu, the waters of Nu, or the waters of Nut. And actually, there's a third one, maybe that's even earlier than this, that I just put in here that I forgot about. So I'm reading from my book. So uh, the Mediterranean Sea. So about 5.6 million years ago, um, to about 5.3 million years ago, the Mediterranean Sea dried up and only had small lakes within inside of it. So there's mountains in between Gibraltar and that northeastern northern coast. Um, what is that called? They call that the Pillars of Hercules. So you have the Atlantic stopped with mountain ridges in between these two continents, and the Mediterranean's drying out when all the glaciers sucked up all the water during that time. So for like about 300,000 years, um, most of it was dry, and you can actually walk across into um, Europe and on the other sides as well. Um, so that's like from 5.6 to 5.3 million years ago. So humans aren't really, there's not really humans, there's no humans at that time, but there's like ape-like species, ape-like humans. I don't know if you want to really call them ape, but they're like the early ancestors of humans who could have passed back and forth during that time. No other civilization existed at 400,000 years ago when this lake filled. There was no Egypt, no Sumer, etc. So yeah, that's 400,000 years ago is really really early. You don't have any really, I don't think, and I didn't spend a lot of time on it, any settlements or anything in Egypt at this time. Egypt, mm, uh, even probably the top portion of Egypt was probably already still covered with water, like a gulf. Um, so this lake actually filled at about the same time that the Middle Stone Age in East Africa is beginning. And the Middle Stone Age is really an um, advanced age. That's where I would like to do more research in, would be in the Middle Stone Age. You would get more information of the really um, earliest culture characteristics. If there was any kind of religious ideas or anything at that time, I think that that would be the best place to look and do research into. But I didn't spend a lot of time on that because I want to kind of get through this part. Um, so there was no Egypt, no Sumer at this time. People were barely at the beginning of the Middle Stone Age when this occurred, although the Middle Stone Age were a highly advanced species at this time, occupying northeastern and eastern Africa. This, of course, depends on whether or not it filled quickly and requires further information. I'm talking about whether it flooded and there was people living there and they died because of the flood. I don't know. Um, Anyways, it's an important location to find the first roots of human existence, and there's a lot more than we would wish to know about this lake, of which would require more extensive research. We'd like to know about the fauna and the flora, the organisms in and around the lake, the various animal species that live in and around the lake, and most importantly, the chemistry of the lake. The reason why I specifically would want to know more about the chemistry of the lake is because I need to know if the water chemistry had anything to do with the evolution of the human species due to the ingestion of the water and its nutrients or from the food in and around the lake. Did it help to advance our intelligence and human evolution? So that's an interesting thing that I'd like to know, that I'd like to find out, that would be, require further research. Um, Nutrition should be a big part of this. I mean, as far as evolution. Um, so there's other beliefs out there that human intelligence evolved because the ingestion of grains, more calories, more animal fat, or animal cholesterol from hunting. And Romanian historian Mircea Eliade says the hominids succeeded over their ancestors by becoming flesh eaters. I don't know if I really believe that, but that's what he says. I just find it hard to believe that East Africa will run out of enough fruits, vegetables, and foliage to eat when one great fig tree can hold up to 40,000 fruits. There are too many historians and anthropologists who fail to distinguish the need for men living up in the northern climates having to find food to eat versus the men living in the tropical climates who have a consistent supply due to the climate. That doesn't mean that they can always stay in one place, but they can move, a mile or two and find different types of food because they live in the tropics. Um, in Africa, they can move from place to place with the temperature remaining virtually the same within the tropics. The weather and the restriction of vegetative growth all year round is the decisive factor for the need to hunt, and it is like Eliade says, the decision to kill is the decisive point of change. So let me repeat those two things that he says. The hominids succeeded over their ancestors by becoming flesh eaters, and the decision of man to kill is the decisive point of change. Meaning, so that's his quote there. That's the end of his quote. Meaning, man's beliefs of himself, his beliefs about animals, and his beliefs about nature were forever changed with his first kill. So, right here, you have the very beginnings of religious beliefs. what we're talking about right now. Food, getting food, because that's a necessary everyday thing, and killing other animals that you are encountering in your day to day life. So you're building a relationship with food, and you're building off ideas of food, and you're building a relationship with animals and in the idea of killing animals for food. We can relate this to the story in the book of Genesis when brother kills brother, which is after sheep were already being killed and eaten. So if you think about that, that's Cain and Abel. Um, Cain is the one who actually brought his father a vegetarian meal to eat. And if you look at that passage, to me it sounds like his dad is telling him, Cain, you don't have anything to worry about because you're doing good. So why are you so worried? And and of course his dad accepts his Abel's killing of the sheep. So, but he doesn't say that he eats it or anything like that. He just says he accepts the fact that Cain killed the sheep and brought it to his father, and that his father was okay with it. Okay, it can be the volcanic ash in the lake, the blue-green algae, or the pH of the water that caused intelligence to increase. But more than likely, it was just from humans evolving over time as he learned more and more and needed to be able to store the information. This time period of about 400,000 years ago roughly coincides with the beginning of the Middle Stone Age tradition in Africa. This is the At this time, it is not far-fetched to call humans highly evolved and intelligent. The Middle Stone Age is what the cultures that is the Middle Stone Age is the time when the cultures of the people who left Africa where where they developed out of. So they developed the people that doesn't make sense. I know I gotta fix that in my book. Um, the people The culture of the Middle Stone Age, those are the ancestors of the people that left East Africa. Because they occupied all the way from where we're talking about right here, and probably even farther down. But for sure, where we're talking about right here, up and through Ethiopia, up and through Egypt, up into right here in the Delta on the northeastern coast before you get on the peninsula. So they were all here, all in this whole area. They were there. They were the most advanced people at that time. They occupied that whole area, and they were the ones who left Africa. The people who left Africa, their ancestors came from the Middle Stone Age. So if you want to do research into the Middle Stone Age, I'm sure they have hundreds of books, and you would be genius on the earliest um, beliefs of our ancestors. So the old idea that that we learned about when I grew up, um, that Stone Age are walking around dragging their women by the hair and clubbing people with the club, and eating meat and killing uh, animals and like a savage. That's really not that's not the truth, right? That's outdated, and that wasn't what was really going on. Um, hunting and killing of animals more so had to take place in the northern climates because it was cold, and of course they had seasonal and things didn't grow for near half the year. But in Africa, that's not true. That's They were very intelligent and more so civilized than we would think. So Lake Nyanza is a newly developed lake compared to Lake Turkana, which seems to be far more important. So when we're talking about Lake Turkana, I'm going to talk a lot about it because it's important and it's where our earliest ancestors came from. So let's take this off and you can see it more right here. This is Lake Turkana. It's in northeast Kenya. It's still 100% in Kenya. And you can see the desert surrounding it. So you might not have known that East Africa has a desert, right? Look at this. You press this. It's pretty big too. And it goes all the way around Lake Turkana. So these are desert people here. So not only does just the Sudan have desert people, they had desert people down here that already knew how to learn and adapt and live in the desert millions of years ago. I don't know the exact date of this desert though, so don't quote me on that. Um, so Lake Turkana is more important than Lake Victoria. I want to make that clear. And the age of Lake Turkana is 4.3 million years ago, dated from within the Kobifora Basin. So 4.3 million years ago. So the whole time that humans and hominids existed, this lake existed and was here in this area where they roamed around. So I want to emphasize a connection of our earliest ancestors to Lake Turkana. Lake Victoria is not here. I don't know what the White Nile was doing. The White Nile must have not been here. Um, so Lake Turkana receives 90% of its water from the Omo River. So the Omo River is right here attaching to Lake Turkana from the north, draining out of the Ethiopian highlands, moving south into Lake Turkana and filling Lake Turkana. And right here in Omo, if you know about the Omo remains, that's our earliest ancestor from the mitochondria um, portion of the DNA where Eve is said to come from. Here, right? That's where the fossils of our earliest women ancestors, our mothers, the earliest ones of our own species, Homo sapiens sapiens, have been found here so far. That doesn't mean that that's not going to change, but it's found here, and I'm pretty sure they're going to want to keep that it's found there because it goes with everything else. So, they got to put some things to rest eventually. Um, The water is moderately saline at 2.5% and has a pH of 9.2, making it very alkaline. The alkalinity is interesting because today some people believe that the body should be kept in an alkaline state for health reasons. I disagree with this because of the current human diet of eating animal products such as meat, eggs, and dairy that make the body acidic. Acid is needed in the body in order to break down and digest meats and proteins. If one were to make his body alkaline, you would think that he would have trouble digesting meat, which would create potential health risks such as colon cancer and other digestive diseases. Around and above the lake, strong diurnal winds mix the water of the lake, and in it there are high levels of dissolved O2 at about 70% solution in the northern half of the lake. See, so we're gonna start getting very technical now, and these are where my sources are coming in, and you know, this is the professionals talking here now. So, um, the chemistry provided by these researchers is very valuable and useful for further discoveries. The principal ions are Na, which is the sodium ion, NCO3, which is bicarbonate, and Cl, which is chloride. With low concentrations of the calcium ion, magnesium ion, and sulfate ion, these are all minerals critical to the body and promote alkalinity. All right, let's see. see how far. I think we're already spending a lot of time, so let me wrap up pretty soon here. Um, the salt in the northern portions of the lake is diluted by mixing with the Omo River, and the high alkalinity promotes rapid equilibration of CO2 with the atmosphere. So that's really an interesting point, um, because the river and the lake are ha- the chemistry of the river and the lake have an effect on the atmosphere above. So I find that really interesting. I wish I can go more into that, but we're not. 48 species of fish have been identified in the lake. The dominant phytoplankton are the blue-green algae, Microcystis ceruginosa, and Botryococcus browni. The zooplankton is dominated by protozoans and crustaceans. The river is filled from the rains that occur in the Ethiopian highlands high above. It flows down the Omo River and into the lake, which has no outlet because of the high salt content, which builds up and created a barrier. This shows that early humans had an easy access to salt from dry portions of the lake. So a lot of people in Africa today, they go and they mine salt. They just go to these dry areas and it's right there on the ground. They fill up buckets and they take it and they sell it. They had this access there around this lake 4 million years ago. They had salt. So they could have used salt in their diets. They could have traded and bartered salt at an early age. You never know. The lake is high in sodium bicarbonate and chloride and contains many fish, birds, and crocodiles. The crocodiles are actually the Nile crocodiles. Lake Turkana overflowed into the White Nile in the early Holocene period, and at the following early dates, 102,000 years ago and 195,000 years ago, and maybe also at 123,000 years ago and 172,000 years ago. So during these dates that I just mentioned, Lake Turkana is overflowing, filling up, and pouring over the sides of these hills, dumping mostly right here on the western part down through these valley areas. And if you go more, oh, here you go. So flowing down into the smaller tributary uh, rivers into the main Nile right here. You can see it. So Lake Turkana is actually contributing to the White Nile, and exchange of the Nile crocodile is going back and forth through these little uh, tributaries. I don't know why I can't say that. Tributary rivers, um, up into the lake. So they're finding the Nile crocodile in Lake Turkana. So, and then associate that with any humans living in the area. If they were venturing around the lake, they would run into this crocodiles at this early of an age. So that's the first species of animal that we're talking about is the crocodile. Put Egypt in your mind also at the same time that we're talking about the crocodile. I lost where I was at. Sorry. Um, okay. The most significant time that this was occurring was at 195,000 years ago, mark near the time of mitochondria Eve and the height of the Middle Stone Age. So it was overflowing when our earliest mother ancestor was there at the top, around by the top of the lake, around by the Omo River. It was overflowing. The Nile crocodiles existed during that time, moved back and forth between the Nile, and there was a relationship there with our earliest mother ancestors. It wasn't just one woman, it was several women with the same genetics. Her grandparents, her kids, her brothers, her sisters, um, aunts, uncles, everybody in that area had that same DNA. Um, A vast, a vast floodplain would have been created west in the northwest of the lake, sending a flow of water streaming down into the river from nearby tributaries. At these times, the crocodiles had the ability to pass to and from the Nile River and Lake Turkana. Now the level of the lake is much lower, and now today the level of the lake is much lower and surrounded by desert, much like countries of Egypt and the Sudan. A low population exists today in the areas around the lake and its immediate vicinity. In pockets around the lake, there are rich aquatic ecosystems that reflect earlier communication with the Nile Basin. That's a quote there from one of my books. So they have evidence from the lake, fish, the water, that it shows communication with the Nile Basin. So the Nile Basin is, well, down there, like I told you, once they reach the Nile, it can be the Nile Basin is down here by the White Nile. There's a Nile Basin up north by the Blue Nile. Signs that the aquatic lifestyle moved from the lake northwards down the river, originating in southwest Kenya, and the expansion of the population occurring over several thousands of years. The aquatic traditions are also a proposed location for the beginnings of kingship. So let me repeat that. This aquatic lifestyle that was in and around Lake Turkana, the Omo River, and the tributaries leading down to the White Nile may have been the beginning of where kingship first occurred and developed, and moved from there north. We talk about that more when we get into the earlier dates. We don't know how early kingship actually goes back. Right now, they only got it going back maybe 9,000 BC, possibly, um, possibly that early. That might be too early, but when we see that there's already a connection here with our own earliest species, then we got to think more that how far does it go back? So I propose that Lake Turkana should be looked at for the roots of kingship. That's what I say. That's what I think. Um, I think others, from what I'm getting at, they might actually put it more. Well, that's, yeah, southwest Ethiopia, which is where Eve was at anyway. So okay, so now I'm gonna get in. Okay, all right. I might. I think I'm just gonna end that video right there. That's a lot of information already. Let me just end this one right here, and then we'll get into more. So that was a lot of information. Thanks for watching. Do me a favor, subscribe if you're if it what I just talked about was interesting to you. We go more and more on this. Um, tell your friends, share my videos with your friends, and thank you very much, much appreciated, and see you on next video.